But I want to tell you as a story. Uh, this story is not true, but it will ring very true. We all know someone like Dave. Dave is a small business owner in a local town. It's a small town, maybe a town of 50,000 people. They have a cafe down on the square, and he's owned this coffee shop slash cafe for 10 years and has been successful. He's been able to pay his bills, take some money home, go on a vacation, uh, spend a little bit of money. It's been okay. Well, he rocked along that way for a while, and then suddenly a competitor opened up around the corner. If that hasn't happened to you, it will. There is competition for everything that we do, and someone else will try to do it different and better than you. And so a store opened up around the corner, and he thought, that's fine. I have loyal customers. They'll keep coming. For a while, he was right. And then over time, he started seeing them walk past his door and walk into the new shop. You know the kind of place. Everything is LCD monitors with the menus, fancy drinks, cafe, latte, mocha, whatever kind of sizes you want to order, they had it all. And all the influencers were showing up to take their pictures there. It was a big deal in this small town. And suddenly Dave's foot traffic starts to disappear. Well, he tries lots of things to fix it. You know, he goes online and does some research to try to figure out, how do I get people back in my doors? He signs up for some courses. He's paying coaches and gurus to try to figure out how to get this going again, and nothing seems to work. Well, as time goes on, he starts getting letters in the mail telling him that he's behind with different vendors. So he would just file them away and ignore them and keep going, trying to get more business. Well, then one day he gets an envelope with a green sticker on it. We've all seen these envelopes. It's certified mail. Certified mail is never good news. Certified mail is always bad news. And Dave knew it. And so he opened that envelope slowly. And inside the envelope was a letter from his landlord saying that he had 30 days to get out of the space. He was being evicted. He was shaking as he took the coffee pot back to the counter and tried to lay it down on the counter. He was shaking so much that he dropped it. That glass carafe went everywhere. Well, the one customer he did have noticed, of course, and said, Dave, are you okay? And Dave told him, no, I'm not okay. This has probably been one of the worst days of my life. And Frank, the customer, said, well, Dave, can you sit down for a second? I'd like to talk to you. And so they sat down together, and as they began to talk, Frank explained to Dave that he could help him with some of his small business issues if he would just kind of tell him the story, tell him what's going on. And as Dave started to open up with Frank about the details of the business, the picture started to become clear for Frank that there were some things that he could do to improve. So he asked Dave, hey, could I look at some of your documents, like your lease agreement, your vendor agreements? And so suddenly the table's full of paperwork, and they're going through it together. And Frank finds in the lease agreement a clause buried in there that said that in this building which is just around the corner, is adjacent to his, you couldn't have another coffee shop cafe. There couldn't be competition in the same building. Well, Dave didn't know that. Now he does. Now he has a little bit more knowledge. And then Frank found in some vendor agreements some terms that would allow him to renegotiate the prices. And so as they went through these papers, Dave started to be able to breathe a little bit, get a little more calm. Now, they didn't solve all of his problems that day at the table, but Dave left that table with hope. And we've all been in a position where just a little bit of hope can make a really big difference. Well, so Dave left the meeting with Frank with hope that he could live to fight another day, and started implementing some of the things that Frank had advised him to do. Now, Frank wasn't just a customer. Frank was a small business lawyer. And Dave learned that day what it is like to work with a small business lawyer that is customer focused and entrepreneur focused and really understands the legal game. Dave was in a spot where he was what I call captive. A captive entrepreneur is someone that's reactive, unprotected, stuck, overwhelmed. Their life is chaotic. Well, many of you with us today may be in that spot where you feel captive. A captive business owner doesn't have the ability to go on vacation. They don't have the ability to close down or be away from their business for a few weeks at a time. They have no freedom in life. They're chained to that business. They're truly captives, right? And so I leaned that way for quite a while in my business, where my family vacations were I would take a Friday off and maybe a Monday morning. But if I did that, I paid dearly for it by working extra hours the 2 or 3 days before and then when I got back. Well, that's not the kind of life that I want you guys to have. I don't want you to be captive to your small business. I believe small business is the best vehicle, bar none, to achieve your goals and dreams, but it's got to be done right. You can't be in this place where Dave was. Let me tell you a little bit of my story. In 1991, I met my wife, Bibi. That's where it all began. In 91, we got married June 15th, and that's when I became responsible for another person. And in my experience, that's when you really start living life. And we didn't have any money. We didn't actually have jobs when we got married. And so we were truly living on love. Now, I like to call those the ramen years, where we were living just on love. But the time was very valuable, and I started to learn some things. I got my first job at AT&T as what they called an independent authorized agent. And I was able to sell things to an aftermarket in Tulsa. And it was a great territory. I started to learn some things in their system. One of the things I learned was that I could find in their database all the customers that had what we call expiring maintenance contracts, and then it would give me the pricing for a renewal contract. Now, these AT&T phone systems would last forever as long as you maintained them. So I wrote a really nice sales letter. I sent them a quote, a contract. It was on carbon paper, so they could fill that thing out, sign it, send it back to me. And so I was getting mailbox money. We would print these deals out on my dining room table on our old dot matrix printer, and they would come back signed, at least half of them. And then I would follow up with some simple phone calls to get about another 25%. So we were making more money than we really had ever seen. It was a really fun experience. Not only was I meeting with customers and selling them phones, but we had this mailbox system working, right? And then suddenly we get a new general manager. If you've ever worked anywhere where you get a new general manager, they usually come in and shake things up. It's not always a really fun experience. And that's what kind of happened to us. The new general manager came in. She was very complimentary of the system I'd built. In fact, she loved it so much that she took it away from me and gave it to a minimum wage worker. The problem with that is that I no longer had a territory. So she then sent me to Southeast Oklahoma, which is a beautiful part of Oklahoma. Unfortunately, they don't have a lot of business phones, so they really sent me there to die. Well, I did what any normal person would do. I went to law school. Okay, maybe every normal person wouldn't do that, but that's what I did. I decided at that time to take the LSAT and go to law school. So we headed off to OU. In 96, I graduated with a law degree from OU and got my first job. And in that first job, I started doing all kinds of litigation. And you start learning what you like and don't like. And I learned one thing I didn't like was billing by the hour. Not only was it not fun keeping track of your time, but it also didn't seem very fair to the client because I controlled how much time I spent on any given file, project, or case. And it wasn't based on the outcome or value I was giving them. It was just based on the amount of time I took to accomplish that task. Well, over the years, I started doing different kinds of law. I did catastrophic personal injury for a while. And in 2004, I was awarded the multi-million-dollar Advocates Forum Award because I was settling and getting awards of multi-millions of dollars for our clients. Now, this was back in 2004 when that was really big money. $1 million is not quite as much as it was in 2004, but in those days, it was a lot of money. And we were helping people that were at their worst, right? They'd lost a loved one, they become paralyzed in an auto accident, they'd lost a limb. This was serious things for them, and my job was to make them whole. And so I started getting rewarded for the value I was providing them. And I really, really liked that. In 2005, I had the chance to form my own law firm. And so we formed what is now the Reeb firm. There was now Reeb Law. It was the Reeb firm. The Reeb firm sounded smart to me, but everyone else didn't understand exactly what we did. Some people thought maybe we were a CPA firm. Some people thought it said farm, and so they thought that we were farmers. So we changed it to Reeb Law to make it very, very simple for them to know what we do. In 2013, my life changed again. At this point, I was doing business a little differently. We had started our legal coaching program called Access, and I met this man, Tom Ziglar. Tom Ziglar is the proud son of Zig Ziglar, and my life changed that day in Houston, Texas, when I went to his Born to Win conference. I was amazed when he took stage and the wisdom coming out of him that was his father's. And then by the end of this program, I had signed up for their coaching program and was fortunate enough to get a ride to lunch. At lunch, one of his partners, Howard Partridge, was talking to me about my business, and they happened to ask, "How are you getting back to the airport tonight?" And so I said, "Well, I'll call the cab driver that brought me here." This was really before Uber. And he said, "No, you don't need to do that. I'll have Tom drive you." I'm like, "Tom who?" And he said, "Tom Ziglar." I'm like, "Okay." So we walk back into the conference room, and he tells Tom Ziglar that you're going to take Scott to the airport. Tom said, "Sounds good to me. I'm leaving at 4:45 sharp." So I had my bag ready. I signed up for their coaching program. We jumped in Tom's rental car in Houston. And if you've ever been to Houston at rush hour, you can't get, well, we were actually in Pearland. You can't get anywhere in Houston fast. And so I was with Tom Ziglar in his rental car for almost 2 hours. It was the opportunity of a lifetime to be able to ride around with the son of Zig Ziglar and hear Zig's wisdom coming out of Tom. I got to the airport with him. We both were getting on different planes back to Dallas. I called my dad and said, "You're not going to believe what just happened." Dad was in sales and went to Zig's events. I'm like, I just rode around in the car with Tom Ziglar. I thought I'd probably never see him again. We got on the planes, both went back to Dallas. And I remembered when the next week that there was going to be another Born to Win event in Dallas. I couldn't make the morning because I had to be in court, but I could be there at lunch. So I took off in my truck and drove to Dallas and got there right about lunch break. And when I walked in, they made a big deal of me, which was great. Made me feel good. And then Howard Partridge asked me if I would take him to lunch. He needed to run by the drugstore, run an errand or two. So we jumped in my truck and we did that. We get back and he starts introducing me to the whole Ziglar team. And back then they were doing a lot of big corporate training, so they had a large team. And so as I'm telling them what I do, which is act as a legal coach for entrepreneurs, they say, "Tom needs that." I'm like, I told Tom what I do. And they're, "Yeah, no, he really needs that." And they set up a lunch for me about 2 weeks later to meet with Tom Ziglar at a Mexican restaurant in Lewisville, Texas. And so we sat down together for lunch, and I asked Tom, who is is a sales expert, I said, "Hey, would you mind if I just showed you my sales presentation?" Back then it was a flip chart, right? And so I took him through our flip chart and got to the end and said, "Mr. Ziglar, is there any reason that you would not do business with me today?" And got quiet and just let it sit. And Tom said, "No, if you'll get me an agreement, I'll sign it." And so the Ziglars became fairly early on Access members, which is our legal coaching plan. And so since then, I've become the official small business lawyer for Ziglar and small business. And then I am also a legacy certified trainer, and I can teach Zig's leadership courses. Right. We talked about captive entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I've learned in working with Tom and all the people that he's put in my life is that there's another side to that coin that I call Shatterproof. And Shatterproof means freedom to show up where it matters most. Being Shatterproof isn't about money. Money helps. As Zig often said, that I've had problems with money and problems without money, and if I'm going to have problems, I'd rather have money. But it's not about the money, right? Shatterproof is being able to do things like coach 2 or 3 soccer teams at a time when everyone else is at work. It's about being able to do things like coach your son's high school soccer team, which practices in the afternoons and plays games out of town. Because I had been building my business on systems and not just hard work, I was able to go do those things and spend valuable time with my boys and with other young people, because I had gotten to a point where my business and my life were what I call shatterproof. The shatterproof is when you're being proactive, focused, secure, you're thriving, you're free. I'm guessing that sounds attractive to some of you guys. Is there anyone in here that maybe feels like they're still on that captive side, where they haven't crossed over to shatterproof, that they don't feel free, they still feel kind of bound to their business? If so, put in the chat for me. Just put yes. Give me just a second. I'll step up there. I totally understand that feeling. Yes. Thanks, Jillian. Yeah, so almost every business owner I know has been there. One of the things that started me on my journey is that I read Michael Gerber's book. Anyone read his book, The E-Myth Revisited? And as I was reading that, it was all me, right? I'm sorry, I got the wrong slide here. But as I read that book, I could see me in that book, and that I was the one wearing all these hats suddenly that I hadn't planned on wearing, because I thought I could make more money by doing it myself, right? And that's when you start running into what I call the 5 legal threats. Why do these happen? Well, they happen because you're making reactive decisions instead of proactive decisions. You have a DIY mindset, which, hey, at home, that's fine. If you want to do DIY projects at home, that's great. But if you do DIY stuff for your business, it tends to get you in trouble, right? You guys, you're smart enough to do what you're doing, and you've got a knack for that, right? That's your zone, that's your expertise. But you're not a CPA, you're not a lawyer, you're not a copywriter, you're not an ad buyer, you are a plumber, you are a doctor, you're a lawyer, but you're not those other things. And when we start doing those other things on top of trying to manage our business, that's when these threats happen. Right, the first one I want to talk about, the first big threat, I call phantom protection. Phantom protection is when you think you're protected, but you're not. An example of that would be that you have an LLC. Anyone in here have an LLC or a corporation? I know Linda does. Yep, let's go. Right, so you have one. Well, the way a lot of people get their LLC now is they go to an online portal, and they pay a service $100 to form their LLC. And then they go to the bank and open up their bank account, and they think that they've done everything they needed to have LLC. Now, the reason you get an LLC is because you want that limited liability company. The limited liability company is what separates you from your business. If you don't have a legal entity, then you don't have phantom protection. You just have no protection. You're what we call a sole proprietorship, and there's nothing that medical science can do for you. If you get sued, it's going to be all on you, right? Most of the people that we're talking to today, you probably have your LLC or an Inc. Maybe you have multiple legal entities. The question is, are they really giving you protection? Right. When you have phantom protection, you think it's enough but you haven't maintained it. You're not doing minutes. You're not being careful about how you sign contracts, and some of your business contracts have your name at the top instead of your company name, and you're signing them at the bottom with your personal name and not with your title. Well, that can wipe all the protection away. Or you're mixing personal and business funds and you're not properly documenting that. You're skipping paperwork like the operating agreement. The operating agreement, sometimes called a company agreement, is the rules for how your LLC runs. Now, maybe it's just you're the only owner right now, but at some point in the future, someone else could be an owner. How could that happen? You could take on partners that come into your company and become co-owners. Well, now how do you vote on things? How do you make decisions? How do we end this thing if we want to? How do I get out? How do you buy me out? All those things can be handled in an operating or company agreement. But if you don't have one, then you're not protected. There's things that you have skipped over and missed, right? So you've got to have those things. The other, and I mentioned that, is you have to make sure you're signing contracts in the right way. And I see this all the time where people mess up and they think they've got protection and don't. You know, I'd rather you not have any protection and just know, hey, I'm risking it all. I've jumped out of the airplane without a parachute, and at least you know. G.I. Joe taught me as a kid that knowing is half the battle. But if you think you have protection and don't, that's when you can really get into danger, because then you're acting as if you have protection, and that will get you into bigger trouble. The next big threat is what I call Frankenstein contracts. And I know you guys have all done this, right? Here's the deal. You've got a contract that you maybe took from another company where you used to work. You Googled and found a contract that kind of made sense. And then maybe you asked a friend and they sent you a contract, and you've taken these three contracts and put them together, hit them with lightning, and brought that thing to life. And now you think you have a legal binding contract. And you might. But the chances are that contract isn't, because it wasn't written specifically for your deal, isn't correct. Right? It doesn't have the things that you need for protection to be a real binding contract. Well, how do you end up here? Right? You've Googled it, you've borrowed templates, you've mashed these together, and so you really need to use contracts that are specifically made, not just for your business, but for the transaction that you're in. Well, the only way to really do that is to have a lawyer review it or write it specifically for your business in that transaction, right? And that can be problematic. It's one of the reasons that we formed our access plan, was so that the entrepreneurs around us could have access to contracts that made sense for the specific situation and for their specific company, rather than having to do it on their own and end up with what's a Frankenstein contract, right? Because most lawyers, if you hire a lawyer, they're going to charge you by the hour. I mentioned earlier that I hate billing by the hour. I find it very inefficient and having to keep track of all my time, and I don't feel it's fair to the client. I want to be on the same side as you. I want to be providing you value, and if I misquote the work, I should lose money, just like you guys do in your business. And so through an access plan, you're able to partner with us, and then we do those contracts for you, and you have a flat monthly investment to make sure that you don't ever have to end up with a Frankenstein contract. The third threat to a small business is what I call burning profits, right? You're working hard, you're making sales, but without the right legal situation and structure and tax structure, you're going through money and you're burning it like just as if you lit it on fire, right? You've stayed a sole proprietor too long. My tax professionals, and I only play a tax lawyer on TV, my tax professional friends tell me that once you hit about a net income of $50,000, you need to change the way you're being taxed. And the way you do that if you're an LLC owner is you make an S election with the IRS. And then you start paying yourself a reasonable monthly salary for the service you provide to your company, right? And so payroll taxes come out of that. And then you can distribute profits to you, and the payroll tax does not come out of that, and then at the end of the year when you file your taxes, you don't pay that self-employment tax anymore. But if you're not making those elections and you're not talking with a tax professional and with a legal professional to structure your business correctly, then you're just burning those profits and you're giving them to Uncle Sam. No, I love our country, but I don't want you giving the country more money than you have to. The name of this game is keep as much as possible of the profit that you make. And then another kind of aside is you got to remember there's two ways you should get paid as a business owner. One is for what you do in the business, and that's that salary we just talked about. And the other is profit. And at some point, the goal or dream would be to only get the profit and be able to have someone else doing all the different jobs in the business where you are just the business owner taking profit out of the business as a reward for what you've built. The other thing you can do is you're missing legal reimbursements for things like fringe benefits deductions, or there's things that you're paying for in the business on your personal credit cards that you're not running through the business and getting reimbursed for, right? So that's burning profits. The other is that you just have never met with the tax professional to create a strategy. And so you're just rolling the dice every year, right? And so by doing that, the threat is that you're going to burn all the profits that you're making to your business. Let's talk about the threat of bad timing. Bad timing, to me, is one of the biggest threats to your small business, right? Here's the story for this one. Linda and I both live in Texas. Say Linda happened to be driving up in Denton, Texas, and she drove past my house and saw smoke coming out of the roof and gave me a call and said, "Scott, I saw smoke coming out of your roof. Is everything okay?" And I said, I didn't know, Linda. We called the fire department. We saved her house, and I saved my family. Linda's a hero. If Linda drives home, calls me the next day and says, "Scott, I saw smoke coming out of your house yesterday when I was driving by. Everything okay?" And I said, "No, Linda, our house burned down and we lost everything." That's the same exact information. It's just 12 hours later, right? Timing is really important. Having the right information at the right time is often the difference between success and failure. And so sometimes by the time you smell the smoke, the fire is already spreading. So you can't keep putting off things like legal structure because it's not urgent, right? It's important. Even if it doesn't feel urgent to you right now, it's really, really important. The other thing is that you wait to get legal help until there's a lawsuit, audit, that kind of a thing, right? The example would be that you're treating the legal side of your business and lawyers as emergency rooms rather than primary care. I've found as I'm getting older that I can't just go to the doctor when I get sick. That's not enough anymore. I now have to see my medical professionals about quarterly, do blood work regularly to keep everything on track, because things that weren't a problem in my 30s are now a problem in my 50s. But if I keep a steady track and connection with my medical team, then I feel good. I can do all the things I want to do, and my health stays steady, and I'm able to control it. Well, legal is very similar to that. And the more time and information you spend and give to your legal professionals, the more they can help you. And the idea is we want to have this really steady pond, right? We don't want to have a lot of ripples. We want it to be steady. And the way you do that is you have to focus on it proactively. If you do it reactively, emergency room style, you're going to spend way more to solve the problems than you could have to prevent them. Yeah, here I'm going to walk you through really quickly, right? Because we've talked about, here's the threats. And this is a 10-part, what I would call roadmap that you can go through to make sure that you're covering all the right areas. First, and you'll see leadership and vision up here on my board. I know that's not legal stuff, but I've found that everything rises and falls on leadership and vision. And if you have that stuff right, you're much more likely to get all the other 9 things right. So you have to start at the top and make sure that you're building this on a solid foundation of leadership and a strong vision, mission, core values, right? The next thing is your entity structure, right? So now we're back to the LLCs. Do you have the right type of entity? Should you have a C Corp? Should you have a C Corp and an LLC? Should you have a holding company and several LLCs? It depends on your business and your situation, but you need to have the right structure in place to have what we call the Shatterproof enterprise structure. The next thing is your operational governance. Do you have a regular rhythm of corporate meetings where you're documenting the decisions that you're making? You're documenting how your year's gone, where you've spent money, how much money you've made, and what your plans are for the future. 4 is that you have contracts and agreements in place that have been written and approved by your legal team. Right? They've been written and approved, not Frankenstein contracts. These are legit contracts that you've paid someone to prepare for your exact situations. The 5th is employment practices. How are you advertising for jobs? How are you offering people jobs? Do you have employment agreements? Do you have a handbook that your employees are signing so they know how their job works, how they get vacation, how they get sick time, how they're disciplined? You have to have all that documented if you want to have a shatterproof business. The 6th thing on the roadmap is intellectual property. Intellectual property is one of these things that kind of sneaks up on people also. They haven't trademarked their brand, right? You want to make sure that your brand is trademarked. Your brand is everything that you project into the world and how you're perceived. But your trademark, for your company name, that's the representation of your brand that you can protect. And the way you do that is by filing a trademark application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And then they say that name represents your brand, and you can put a circle R on that. And when you do that, you can prevent everyone else in the US from using something confusingly similar to your name, right? So now you know that if you climb to the ladder of success, that it's leaning on your building. A lot of times we'll see people get what are called cease and desist letters. You know, those come in those green envelopes too, and saying you have to rebrand in 30 days. And that's because they skipped this step on the roadmap and they didn't protect their intellectual property, right? So it's not difficult. It's not hard to get a trademark. It may take some work to figure out the brand that can be protected. But once you go through that process and they approve it, now you've got it. The other thing is, if you're doing, in the world we live in, if you're doing a lot of video, if you're writing books, those things can be copyrighted and should be. If you have a framework that you take your clients through, you can copyright that framework so that no one else can steal it. I had a client, I guess it's been about 10 years ago. If I said the name, you guys would probably even recognize the name. They were selling online courses and for a lot of money, and they had skipped the step of copywriting the course. And so when they came to me, they were trying to stop these people from stealing their coursework, and they had to back up and go file a copyright application before they could send the cease and desist letters and file a copyright infringement suit, right? So get the steps in order, follow the roadmap. The 7th thing is licensing and compliance. Some of us have to have licenses to do what we do. You know, I've got a license in Texas, Oklahoma, and Utah right now, and they require me to do certain legal education hours and file certain things at certain times. You have to stay compliant with that. If you're a builder, if you're an insurance agent, or there's some states require you to have, or cities, a certain kind of business licenses. So you have to make sure that you're doing those things and staying compliant. Number 8 is asset protection. And this is where you want to make sure that as you're being more successful in business, you're probably taking home some of that money and investing it in assets. A lot of our clients invest in real estate. And if you invest in real estate, you don't want to have that unprotected, which would mean it's just in your personal name, right? You want to have that, any kind of investment inside holding LLCs so that they're separated from your other businesses, which are called operating businesses that deal with humans, because humans create liability. And so you have those under asset protection LLCs, right? Well, the ninth part of the roadmap is financial and tax protection. So you have to have a financial advisor, and some people can find a financial advisor that's also a tax professional. And so they're helping you with that part of the roadmap on how do we plan our future so we can achieve our financial goals, both long-term and then short-term on every year. How do we make sure we're maximizing the profit from our business and keeping it? The 10th part of the roadmap is exit and legacy planning, right? And so this is where we're thinking, am I going to build a business that I'm going to just be an owner and have other people run? Or am I going to build it to a point where I can sell it and step away from the business and do other things, right? That's the exit part. And you have to plan that. It doesn't just happen. So if you're going to sell it, you have to start building it in a way that you can sell it, work with business brokers and people like them that can help you make sure it's structured right so that when the time is right, you can get maximum dollars. Or you need to find someone in your company that would want to take over in the future and make sure they're trained and that your team knows what will happen if something happens to you or if you're ready to step out. And then you have the legacy part of that section where you're putting together an estate plan. And so we've mapped out in like living trusts that own all our assets that say, hey, if something happens to me as the business owner, if I die, this is who's in charge, and they can make the decisions to keep the companies running. Or if I'm incapacitated, they can run the business while I'm trying to get back to health. And then it says who gets what from your businesses. So to back up that exit plan, we now say that if we've picked maybe our operational manager is going to take over the business, we've given that to them in our legacy plan, right? They all have to work, both of those have to work together, right? And so when you get to the end of the roadmap, now we have a complete, what I would call shatterproof business, and you've covered those legal threats up front. And then because you've got a relationship with a legal team, you're covering them on a regular basis to make sure that as things pop up, that you can take care of them as they're coming, rather than have big problems. Okay? The easy part for me is telling you all the things that can happen, right, and that can be bad. If we go back to the story of Dave, Dave thought he had a business that was running great for 10 years, and then suddenly things fell apart. And I don't want you guys to have that kind of problem, right? So what we've done is we've built systems to teach people to protect what they've built before it breaks, right? You don't have to guess. You don't have to react. You just need a plan. Well, we call that a Shatterproof Roadmapping call or an access call. And so what I'd like to offer to everyone on here and as part of LeadHERship is a free road mapping call with me. And so all you have to do is text roadmap to 940-227-3383. And I will send Linda the slide deck, so she'll have it to share with you guys. And then we would love to talk to you and get to know exactly what you do, how you guys work, where there's holes in your business that might be special, that we can tell you specific advice on how to fix that.